Hey everyone, tonight we are drifting back, way back, to the banks of the Nile, where the sun beats down with an intensity that could fry an egg on a pyramid stone, and personal hygiene was, well, let's just say it was a work in progress. Imagine yourself, not in your comfy bed, but in ancient Egypt, maybe around 1500 BCE. The air is thick with the smell of river silt, baking bread, and a hint of something spicy from a nearby market stall. You're probably already sweating, and the idea of a thick head of natural hair under that relentless sun, teeming with uninvited little guests, is less than appealing. Frankly, with the lice situation back then, you probably wouldn't survive a week without either shaving your head or developing a very, very vigorous scratching habit, which, let's be honest, isn't a great look, even for a pharaoh. This evening, we're not excavating tombs or deciphering hieroglyphs about epic battles. No, we're delving into something far more personal, something that sat atop the heads of kings, queens, priests, and everyday people: the meticulous and fascinating art of ancient Egyptian wig making. It's a world of human hair, beeswax, and surprising sophistication. So before you get too comfortable, before you drift off into the land of dreams, go ahead and take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only, of course, if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. We're a community of history lovers and relaxation seekers. Feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always nice to know where our fellow time travelers are tuning in from. Now, let's turn down the lights, switch on your fan for that gentle, soothing background hum, and together, let's begin tonight's journey. You find yourself standing near a bustling marketplace, the sounds of bartering and laughter, a low hum in the background. The Egyptian sun, a relentless golden disk in the clear blue sky, warms your skin, and you instinctively raise a hand to shield your eyes. It's hot, not just warm, but that deep, penetrating heat that makes the air shimmer above the baked earth. You notice the people around you. Many, if not most, have very short hair or entirely shaved heads. It's a practical choice, you realize, in this climate where pests like lice are an ever-present nuisance. Shaving one's head was a common practice for cleanliness, a way to avoid the tiny unwelcome companions that thrived in the warmth. Imagine the relief of a cool breeze on a bare scalp, a stark contrast to the itchiness and irritation of an infested hairdo. Modern shampoo and a fine-toothed comb are millennia away, so a razor, often made of bronze or flint, was your best friend against these persistent critters. But a bare head, while practical, wasn't always the desired look, especially for those with status or for occasions that called for a bit more oomph. And that, my friend, is where the wig comes in. You see them everywhere in various styles and levels of intricacy. Wigs were not just a fashion statement. They were a symbol of social standing, a protective covering against the harsh sun, and an essential element of religious and ceremonial life. Think of them as the original multi-tool of personal adornment. Need to look important for a temple ceremony? There's a wig for that. Want to keep your scalp from sizzling while you oversee the barley harvest? Wig. Trying to signal that you're not currently hosting a small civilization of head lice? Definitely a wig. It's almost funny to think that something we might associate with a bad hair day or a theatrical costume was once a cornerstone of daily life and societal structure. You wander closer to a stall where a craftsman is meticulously working. He's not shaping clay or hammering metal, he's dealing with hair, piles of it. Human hair, it seems, dark and lustrous, lies sorted in bundles. The ancient Egyptians prized human hair for their finest wigs, and it was sourced from various places. Some people might sell their hair, or it could be collected as tribute, or perhaps even saved from a young person's first haircut, a common rite of passage where children often had their heads shaved, leaving only a side lock. This collected hair would then be carefully washed, combed, and sorted by length and quality. You can almost smell the slightly damp, earthy scent of the cleaned fibers, maybe with a hint of whatever rudimentary soap, perhaps made from animal fats and ash, was used. It's a far cry from your scented conditioner, that's for sure. No beautifully packaged bottles of Nile Mist shampoo back then. The craftsman takes a hank of this prepared hair. His tools are simple yet effective: sharp bronze or obsidian blades for cutting, fine-toothed combs likely made of wood or bone, and needles, perhaps also of bronze or even fishbone for finer work. You watch as he begins to lay out the strands, his fingers surprisingly nimble. Early wigs, dating back to the pre-dynastic period, were often simpler affairs, perhaps more like extensions or thickeners for existing hair. But by the Old Kingdom, the era of the great pyramid builders, wig making had already become a sophisticated craft. You can see evidence of this in statues and reliefs from the period, where individuals are depicted with structured, often shoulder-length wigs, sometimes with tight, orderly curls or precise, straight locks. One of the mainstream historical facts that always fascinates scholars is the sheer ubiquity of wigs. They weren't just for the pharaohs and their consorts lounging on gilded barges. While the elite certainly had the most elaborate and expensive creations, made from the finest human hair and adorned with precious materials, wigs of varying quality were worn by many levels of society. A farmer might wear a simpler wig made of plant fibers or animal hair to protect his head while working in the fields, while a noblewoman would possess multiple human hair wigs for different occasions, each a testament to her wealth and status. It was a truly democratic form of headwear in its own ancient way. Your average Joe Blow on the Nile, let's call him Noct, might not have the Beyoncé-level wig of Queen Nefertiti, but he'd have something functional. Now, for a slightly weirder detail, some of these wigs weren't just about looking good or keeping cool, they were also about smelling good. Archaeologists have found traces of fragrant resins, beeswax mixed with perfumes, and even flower petals within the fibers of preserved wigs. Imagine leaning in to greet someone and getting a whiff of myrrh or lotus blossom emanating from their hairpiece. It's like a built-in air freshener, which, given the general lack of widespread plumbing and daily full-body bathing as we know it, might have been a very welcome innovation. Oh, hello, Tutankhamun. Your wig smells divine today. Is that new papyrus essence? It adds a whole new sensory layer to the experience, doesn't it? Suddenly, it's not just visual, it's an olfactory statement too. You see the craftsman now beginning to attach small sections of hair to a base. This base, or foundation, was crucial. It was often made from a net of woven human hair or fine linen, designed to fit snugly over a shaved or closely cropped head. Sometimes, a more solid cap of padded linen or leather was used. The goal was to create something breathable, yet sturdy enough to support the weight of the attached hair, especially for the more elaborate styles. You can imagine the trial and error involved in perfecting these foundations. Too loose, and your fancy headdress might take an unscheduled flight during an important procession. Too tight, and you're nursing a headache that not even the finest Nileside physician could cure. They probably didn't have little rubber grippy bits inside them like some modern wigs. The hair itself, once sorted and cleaned, might undergo further treatment. Sometimes it was coated in a thin layer of beeswax or resin. This helped to keep the strands together, gave them a bit of shine, and made them easier to style into the desired curls, braids, or waves. You can see some hanks of hair that look stiff, almost sculpted. The Egyptians were masters of creating lasting styles. They weren't going for that effortlessly tousled look we sometimes see today. Theirs was a world of intentionality, of clearly defined shapes and structures. Each curl was meant to be a curl, each braid a perfect plait. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of extra hold hairspray, but made from bee byproducts and tree sap. I wonder if they had a bad wig day, like we have bad hair days. Probably involved a lot more beeswax. One of the ongoing debates among Egyptologists is the precise method of sourcing for all this human hair, especially for the sheer volume that would have been required. While selling hair and collecting it from ritual shavings are known, historians still discuss the extent to which hair might have been imported, or perhaps even taken from enemies captured in battle. There's little concrete evidence for the latter in terms of wig production on a mass scale, but it's a grim thought that floats around the fringes of academic discussion. More likely, it was a combination of domestic sources, carefully managed and traded. Perhaps there were hair merchants who specialized in acquiring and preparing this valuable commodity. Got some lovely dark brown here, barely used, only shorn once for the goddess Isis. The craftsman you're observing seems to be making a relatively common style, perhaps a tripartite wig, one with two sections declaratively falling forward over the shoulders and a third section down the back. This style is seen in countless statues and tomb paintings, worn by both men and women. He takes a small cluster of hair, perhaps 50 to 100 strands, folds it over a thread, and then skillfully knots or sews it onto the netting of the wig cap. It's a slow, painstaking process. Each cluster must be secured tightly, and the density must be just right. Too sparse, and the netting will show through, which would be terribly déclassé. Too dense, and the wig becomes excessively heavy and hot, defeating some of its purpose. It's a delicate balance, learned through years of apprenticeship. You can see the concentration on his face, the way his brow furrows slightly as he pulls a knot tight. This isn't just a job, it's an art form. You notice that some of the hair being used isn't black or dark brown. There are bundles of lighter hair and then even some reddish tones. While dark hair was predominant, the Egyptians weren't averse to a bit of variety. Sometimes hair was dyed, possibly using henna for reddish tints or other natural pigments for darker shades if the original hair wasn't considered rich enough. The idea of bleaching hair to blonde probably wasn't on their radar, or if it was, the chemical technology was definitely lacking. No ancient Egyptian equivalent of Sun-In or a box of Desert Blonde No. 4. They worked with what they had, enhancing its natural properties or subtly altering its shade. The sun climbs higher, and the shade from the stall's awning becomes more precious. The sounds of the market continue, a donkey braying in the distance, the clatter of pottery, the sing-song cry of a vendor selling dates. But here, in this little bubble of concentration, it's all about the hair. The craftsman pauses, wipes a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and takes a sip of water from a clay jar. He then picks up another tool, a small heated metal rod. Ah, the curling iron, ancient Egyptian style. By wrapping sections of beeswax-coated hair around a heated rod, or by plaiting it tightly and then perhaps applying heat or letting it set, they could create an array of curls, from tight ringlets to looser waves. You can almost smell the faint scent of warm beeswax and singed hair, a familiar smell to anyone who's ever overdone it with a curling wand. Some things, it seems, transcend millennia. I bet there were occasional, oops, I fried that section moments, quickly hidden in the underlayers of the wig. The level of detail is astounding. Some wigs incorporated thousands of individual curls or braids, each one meticulously crafted and attached. Think of the hours, the sheer patience required. It makes our modern morning routine of a quick brush and maybe some products seem laughably simple. These weren't just accessories. They were significant investments of time and resources. A high-quality wig could take weeks, even months to create. And because they were so valuable, they were also maintained and repaired. You wouldn't just toss a wig that took 3 months to make because a few strands came loose. No, you'd take it back to the wig maker for a touch-up, a restyling, perhaps a deep clean with whatever ancient dry cleaning equivalent they had. You glance at a finished wig displayed on a wooden stand. It's a magnificent creation, a cascade of tiny, precise braids, each one perfectly formed, falling to the shoulders. It gleams in the ambient light, the beeswax coating giving it a healthy, vibrant sheen. It looks almost alive, ready to bestow an air of timeless elegance and authority upon its wearer. It's easy to understand why these objects were so prized, why they appear so prominently in the art and artifacts left behind by this enduring civilization. They were a fusion of practicality, artistry, and profound cultural meaning. You can imagine someone, perhaps a scribe or a minor official, saving up for months to commission such a piece, the anticipation building as they awaited its completion. It wasn't just hair, it was status, it was identity, it was a connection to the divine order of Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of harmony and balance. After all, looking your best was part of presenting yourself properly to the gods and to society. No one wants to meet Osiris looking like they just wrestled a crocodile, and the crocodile won the fight with their hair. The process of preparing the raw materials was a craft in itself. Human hair, being the most prized, had to be thoroughly cleaned. This might involve washing it with natron, a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate that was also famously used in the mummification process. Natron was a powerful desiccant and cleaning agent. After washing, the hair would be meticulously detangled, probably using wooden or bone combs with varying tooth spacing, much like we use today. You can picture someone patiently working through a large bundle of tangled hair, separating each strand, a task requiring a gentle touch and immense patience. Any snags or knots would have to be carefully worked out to preserve the length and integrity of the hair. Once detangled, the hair would be sorted by length and sometimes by quality or color. This sorting was crucial for creating wigs of uniform appearance or for achieving specific stylistic effects that required different lengths of hair in different parts of the wig. It's like a textile artist sorting their threads before beginning a complex tapestry. Plant fibers, such as palm leaf fibers or flax, were also used, particularly for less expensive wigs or for the internal padding of more complex structures. These fibers would need to be processed to make them pliable enough to work with, perhaps by soaking, beating, or combing them until they reached the desired texture. They wouldn't have the same natural swing and luster as human hair, but they were more readily available and cheaper, making wigs accessible to a broader segment of the population. It's a bit like the difference between a high-end synthetic wig today and one made of real human hair. Both serve the purpose, but there's a clear difference in quality and feel. Imagine the scratchiness of a cheap fiber wig on a hot day. Makes you appreciate the effort that went into making even the basic ones comfortable. They probably didn't have the option of saying, "Oh, this is just my running errands in the dust storm wig." Animal hair, such as sheep's wool or goat hair, was another alternative, though less common than human hair or plant fibers for the main body of the wig. It might have been used for specific textures or mixed with other materials. Each material presented its own challenges and benefits. Human hair was durable and looked natural but was expensive. Plant fibers were cheap but less realistic and perhaps less comfortable. The wig maker had to be a master of all these materials, understanding how to treat them, shape them, and combine them effectively. The tools, while seemingly simple, were specialized. The razors for shaving heads needed to be kept sharp, a task in itself. Bronze, being softer than steel, would require frequent sharpening. Flint blades, though incredibly sharp, could be brittle. The combs, whether wood or bone, needed to have smooth, well-spaced teeth to avoid snagging the precious hair. Needles, essential for sewing the hair to the cap foundation, would have been tiny marvels of craftsmanship, drilled with an eye small enough for fine thread, perhaps made from twisted linen or even animal sinew. You can picture the wig maker's toolkit, a collection of these items, neatly arranged perhaps in a leather roll or a wooden box, each tool worn smooth with use, a testament to years of skilled labor. It wasn't a factory assembly line, it was a master artisan at work, each wig a unique creation. One can only imagine the whispered trade secrets passed down from master to apprentice, the little tricks for making a curl hold longer or a foundation fit more snugly. Always twist the beeswax clockwise, my boy. The gods prefer it that way. Okay, maybe not that, but you get the idea. Consider the dyes. While henna is well attested for reddish hues, achieving a consistent deep black on hair that might have been naturally lighter, or to cover any gasp gray hairs, would have required some ingenuity. Carbon-based pigments, perhaps from soot, mixed with an oil or fat binder, might have been used. Or mineral pigments like galena, lead sulfide, which was also used for kohl eyeliner, could have been adapted. Experimentation must have been constant. How do you get the dye to penetrate the hair shaft without making it brittle? How do you make it last? These were the chemical challenges of the ancient beauty industry. They probably didn't have patch tests either, so a new dye formula could have resulted in some surprising and possibly itchy outcomes. My lord, your new eternal night black wig seems to be attracting a lot of flies. And is that your scalp turning green? The environment of a wigmaker's workshop would have been a hive of quiet activity. Perhaps several artisans worked together, each specializing in a different part of the process, one cleaning and sorting, another weaving the foundations, a master stylist doing the intricate setting and finishing work. Apprentices would be learning the trade, starting with the most basic tasks and gradually earning more responsibility. The air would be filled with the subtle scent of hair, beeswax, perhaps herbs or perfumes used in the finishing process, and the low murmur of conversation. It would likely be a well-lit space, either an outdoor shaded area or a room with large openings to let in the ample Egyptian sunlight, essential for such detailed work. You can almost hear the rhythmic click of needles, the soft scraping of combs, the occasional sizzle of a hot styling tool. It's a scene of intense focus and skilled craftsmanship, a world away from the monumental construction of temples and pyramids, yet just as integral to the fabric of ancient Egyptian life. These weren't just objects, they were expressions of identity, status, and belief, painstakingly brought into existence strand by strand. The dedication is something to behold, especially when you consider your own patience levels when trying to untangle a single necklace. These people were on another level. The social standing of a wig maker is something that sparks interest. Were they considered mere laborers or respected artisans? Given the skill involved and the importance of wigs to the elite and for religious purposes, it's likely that master wig makers held a respected position similar to other skilled craftspeople like jewelers, sculptors, or fine carpenters. They were, in essence, the hairdressers to the gods and kings, or at least to their earthly representations and followers. Their workshops might have been located in specific districts, perhaps near temples or the homes of the wealthy, their primary clientele. They wouldn't be advertising with flashy neon signs saying Pharaoh's finest pharaonic does, but their reputation would have spread by word of mouth and by the walking advertisements on the heads of their satisfied customers. The earliest wigs from the pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods, roughly 3100 to 2686 BCE, were often simpler in construction. You might see basic skull caps with rows of hair attached, sometimes resembling a very full, short haircut. As Egyptian society became more stratified and wealthy, particularly during the Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BCE, the era when the Great Pyramids at Giza were built, wig styles became more elaborate and varied. This is when you start seeing those classic, shoulder-length, block-like wigs, often with very fine parallel strands or subtle waves. They projected an image of stability and order, mirroring the perceived cosmic order of Ma'at. The craftsmanship required to create these uniform, dense looks was already considerable. Think about the very concept of a wig in that era. In a society where hygiene was a constant concern and a shaved head was a practical solution to lice, the wig offered a way to reclaim the aesthetic and symbolic power of hair without the biological downsides. It was a clever workaround, a triumph of human ingenuity over tiny, biting adversity. It also allowed for an idealized presentation. Your natural hair might be thinning or going gray or just stubbornly refusing to do what you want it to do. Some things never change, right? But your wig? Your wig could be perfect, eternally youthful, perfectly coiffed, always the right color and style. It was a form of controllable self expression, an idealized representation. You could literally put on your important person head. You watch as the wig maker you've been observing selects a thin bronze needle and a fine linen thread. He's working on the edge of the wig cap, carefully stitching a row of human hair that has already been styled into tight, corkscrew curls. Each curl is about the diameter of a small reed. He loops the thread through the base of the curl bundle, then through the netting of the cap, pulling it taut with a practiced tug. It's repetitive work, yet it requires unwavering attention to detail. One loose stitch, one misaligned curl could mar the perfection of the whole. Imagine doing that for hours, days, weeks. It's a testament to the human capacity for patience and precision. Modern wig makers often use specialized ventilating needles and can work incredibly fast, but the fundamental principle of attaching hair strand by strand, or in small groups, to a base remains surprisingly similar for high-quality pieces. It makes you wonder if this ancient craftsman, if transported to a modern theatrical wig workshop, would, after a bit of bewildered head-scratching about the electric lights and strange new materials, nod in recognition at the core techniques. Ah, yes, the tiny knots, still the tiny knots. Some things are timeless. Now, where is my beeswax? The foundation, or wig cap, you were looking at earlier, is a critical piece of engineering. It's not just a shapeless bag, it's carefully constructed to conform to the human head. Some caps were made by intricately weaving strands of human hair together to form a fine, strong net. This method allowed for excellent ventilation, a crucial feature in the Egyptian heat. Imagine the relief of a slight breeze managing to find its way through the wig to your shaved scalp. It's like ancient air conditioning for your head. Other foundations were made from linen, perhaps layered and stitched for structure, or even soft leather. The choice of material might depend on the intended style and weight of the wig, or the status of the wearer. A heavier, more elaborate wig would require a sturdier, possibly padded foundation to distribute the weight and maintain its shape. They probably didn't have memory foam back then, but a well-padded linen cap would have been the next best thing for comfort. The method of attaching the hair to this foundation is where the real magic happens. You saw him knotting and sewing. That sewing technique, often using a running stitch or a back stitch with fine linen thread, was common. Small bundles of prepared hair, sometimes just a few dozen strands, sometimes more, would be folded over, and the folded end would be stitched directly onto the cap. For a really dense look, these bundles would be placed very close together, overlapping slightly, so no hint of the underlying cap would show. Think of it like planting tiny seedlings in incredibly neat rows, each one contributing to the overall lushness of the final product. Another technique involved weaving the hair onto the foundation threads. This could create very secure and natural-looking results, as the hair would appear to grow directly from the base. Sometimes a layer of beeswax or resin would be applied to the cap first, and the hair strands would be pressed into this adhesive layer while it was still warm and pliable. As the wax cooled and hardened, it would grip the hair firmly. This method might have been quicker for certain styles, but perhaps less durable than sewing or knotting, especially in extreme heat. You wouldn't want your majestic beehive to start shedding strands during an important audience with the pharaoh because the beeswax was having a meltdown. Is that is that your hair, vizier, or are we experiencing a very localized shower of locust legs? A pharaoh might quip. Probably not, but the structural integrity was key. The real artistry, though, came in how these techniques were combined and how the hair itself was treated before attachment. The Egyptians were masters of creating curls, waves, and braids, and these were often formed before the hair was even attached to the wig. You see hanks of hair, already tightly curled or plaited, waiting their turn. To create those iconic tight ringlets, strands of hair, likely coated with a bit of beeswax or a setting lotion made from something like acacia gum, would be meticulously wound around thin wooden or bronze rods. These would then be allowed to dry, perhaps in the sun or sometimes with gentle heat applied, maybe by waving them carefully over a warm stone or a low brazier, being careful not to scorch the precious fibers. Once set, the rods would be removed, leaving a perfect springy curl. These pre-formed curls would then be attached, one by one or in small clusters, to the wig cap. It's like creating thousands of tiny perfect springs. The patience involved is just staggering. Try making one perfect curl with a modern curling iron and see how long your attention span lasts. Now multiply that by 1,000. Braiding was another highly developed skill. From incredibly fine, numerous plaits that cascaded down the back and shoulders, to thicker, more structural braids that formed part of an elaborate updo, the variety was immense. Sometimes these braids were interwoven with beads of faience, glass, or even semi-precious stones like carnelian or lapis lazuli, adding color, texture, and a clear statement of wealth. Imagine the gentle clicking sound these beaded braids would make as the wearer moved. It's ASMR, ancient Egyptian style. These tiny braids, sometimes hundreds of them, in a single wig, would each be plaited with incredible precision, the tension just right to keep them neat and uniform. Then, those too would be sewn or knotted onto the foundation. It's like micro macrame, but with human hair. One wonders if they got hand cramps. They must have. I'm sorry, Pharaoh. Your divine audience will have to wait. My chief wig braider has a repetitive strain injury from plaiting 700 individual strands for your new festival wig. The styles themselves are a fascinating study. During the Old Kingdom, you often see shorter, somewhat blocky wigs, giving an impression of solidity and order. The Nubian wig, a short, tight, layered, curly style, was also popular and is seen on both men and women in tomb paintings and statues. It's a style that looks remarkably timeless. Then, as you move into the Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE, styles sometimes became a bit softer, perhaps with longer flowing locks or more intricate arrangements of curls and braids. The famous tripartite wig, with two sections falling forward over the shoulders and a longer section down the back, remained a staple for both genders and across various social strata, though the length, fullness, and decoration would vary. It's a very balanced, symmetrical look, which appealed greatly to the Egyptian aesthetic of order, ma'at. The New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE, the era of famous pharaohs like Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Ramesses the Great, is often considered the golden age of Egyptian wig making. This is where you see the most elaborate and voluminous creations. Styles became incredibly diverse. Women, especially those of high status, are often depicted with long, flowing wigs, sometimes with a mass of curls, sometimes with countless fine braids, often adorned with beads, ribbons, or golden ornaments. You see layered looks, with shorter sections on top and longer tresses underneath. Some wigs were so large and heavy they must have required considerable neck strength to wear for any length of Farah. Imagine Queen Nefertiti, whose famous bust showcases her wearing a distinctive tall, flat-topped blue crown, but in other depictions, she and other royal women sport these incredible, almost architectural wigs. They weren't just hair, they were crowns of hair. It's almost like a competition. My wig is bigger and has more beads than your wig, a subtle or not so subtle display of status. Men's wigs in the New Kingdom also showed variety. While the shorter styles and the tripartite wig continued, you also see more elaborate ceremonial wigs for priests and high officials. Soldiers or working men might wear simpler, shorter wigs, or even just padded caps for protection and comfort. It's a mainstream historical fact that the variety of wig styles exploded during this period of unprecedented wealth and imperial power. The Egyptians were encountering more foreign cultures through trade and conquest, and this likely influenced their fashions, including hairstyles and wig designs, though Egyptian styles remained distinctively their own. They'd see a Syrian envoy with a particular beard style, or a Nubian princess with a certain braided arrangement, and a little spark of inspiration might ignite. I like those tassels, but let's make them Egyptian tassels. Now for a peculiar, somewhat fringe detail. Wigs weren't just for the living. They were also made for the dead, and even for the statues of gods and goddesses in temples. Mummies have been found adorned with elaborate wigs, intended to ensure they looked their best in the afterlife. The god Osiris, lord of the underworld, is often depicted wearing the Atef crown, but statues of other deities in their temple sanctuaries might have been provided with actual wigs, perhaps made of human hair or other fine materials, which would be ritually cared for by the temple priests. Imagine being a temple attendant, whose job it is to comb and perfume the wig of the statue of Hathor. It brings a very personal, almost domestic touch to their religious practices. Don't forget to rebraid Amun-Ra's left side lock. It's looking a bit frizzy, and you know how he gets these divine wigs were likely anointed with sacred oils and perfumes, further blurring the line between art, adornment, and religious devotion. The actual wig makers, these skilled artisans, who were they? Most were likely men, though women might have been involved in some stages of preparation, like cleaning and sorting hair, or even fine braiding. They would have undergone a lengthy apprenticeship, learning the trade from a master craftsman, possibly their own father or another relative. It was a skill passed down through generations. Their workshops might have been relatively small, perhaps attached to their homes, or they could have been part of larger temple or palace workshops that catered specifically to the needs of the priesthood and the royal family. You can picture a master wig maker, his eyes sharp, his hands calloused but incredibly deft, overseeing his apprentices, correcting their technique, and taking on the most challenging commissions himself. He would need a good eye for proportion, a sense of style, and an intimate understanding of his materials. He was part sculptor, part engineer, part fashion designer. The tools they used, beyond the basic combs, needles, and cutting implements, might have included specialized stands for holding the wigs during construction and styling, similar to the wig blocks used today. These would be carved from wood, perhaps roughly in the shape of a human head. They would also need pots for melting beeswax and resins, and perhaps for mixing dyes if they were coloring the hair. Small braziers or heated stones for styling would require careful handling to avoid accidents. Safety regulations were probably not a big thing. Oops, did I just set fire to that pile of very expensive imported human hair? Best not tell the boss. An ongoing academic debate revolves around the daily wearability of some of the more extreme New Kingdom wig styles depicted in art. Some of these wigs are enormous, towering structures of curls and braids, often adorned with heavy jewelry. Historians still discuss whether these represent idealized artistic conventions, perhaps worn only for very specific ceremonial occasions or in the afterlife, or if the Egyptian elite really did go about their daily business sporting these massive, potentially cumbersome creations. While some tomb paintings show individuals engaged in everyday activities like banqueting or supervising estates while wearing quite elaborate wigs, it's possible there was a degree of artistic license. However, actual examples of complex, multi-part wigs found in tombs, like those of the noblewoman Merit, wife of Ka, the chief architect for Amenhotep III, show that highly sophisticated and voluminous wigs were indeed real objects. Perhaps they had everyday elaborate and super duper extra special occasion don't move your head too fast elaborate. It's likely a spectrum. Some art idealized, some art reflected reality, and many real wigs were truly spectacular feats of engineering designed to be worn, if not always with maximum comfort, then certainly with maximum impact. Think about the coloring of these wigs. While deep black or dark brown was the most common and often depicted color, achieved through natural hair color or dyes like carbon black, henna was widely used to achieve reddish or auburn tints. You sometimes see figures in paintings with distinctly red-brown hair. The use of henna also had conditioning properties, which might have been an added benefit. However, achieving vibrant, unnatural colors like the bright blue or green seen in some stylized depictions or on certain divine crowns was not typically done with hair dyes for wigs meant to look like hair. Those colors were usually reserved for symbolic headdresses or parts of crowns made from other materials, like faience or painted wood. But they did get creative with embellishments. Beads of blue lapis lazuli or turquoise faience, green feldspar, red carnelian, and gold would be woven into the braids or attached to the wig, bringing those vibrant colors into the hair arrangement. So while your wig itself might be a natural hair color, it could be a veritable rainbow of jeweled accents. Does this lapis lazuli bring out the color of my coal, do you think? The attachment of these embellishments was another layer of artistry. Tiny gold tubes could be crimped onto the ends of braids. Beads could be threaded onto strands of hair as the wig was being constructed or sewn on afterwards. Delicate gold wires might be wrapped around sections of hair, or small rosettes and other ornaments made of sheet gold could be stitched onto the surface. For the truly wealthy, a wig could be a significant display of their riches, almost as much as their jewelry. The weight of some of these adorned wigs must have been considerable. It gives a new meaning to heavy is the head that wears the crown, or in this case, the incredibly ornate wig. They probably had excellent posture or chronic neck pain, maybe both. Let's consider the journey of a single strand of hair. It's cut or collected, washed, possibly with natron or a basic soap. Then it's painstakingly combed and detangled, sorted by length and quality. Perhaps it's then dyed or coated in beeswax. Then it's either curled around a rod and heated or plaited into a tiny, precise braid. Finally, it's carefully sewn or knotted, along with thousands of its brethren, onto a custom-fitted cap. That one strand, almost invisible on its own, becomes part of a magnificent whole, a testament to human skill and cultural expression. It's a microcosm of civilization itself, individual elements combined through skill and intention to create something greater and more meaningful. You can imagine the dialogue in a wig-maker's shop. A noblewoman arrives, perhaps with a drawing or pointing to a style worn by someone at court. I want something like Lady Amos's new wig, but with more curls at the front. And can you add those little gold hather heads to the ends of the braids? And it needs to be ready for the Oppet festival. The wig maker would nod, perhaps make some suggestions, discuss the type of hair to be used, her own if she had saved it, or high-quality purchased hair. Then a price would be negotiated, likely in goods, as coinage wasn't widely used for much of Egyptian history. Maybe a few sacks of high-quality grain, some linen, a jar of wine, or even livestock for a truly exceptional piece. It was a bespoke service, tailored to the individual client. No one-size-fits-all off-the-shelf options for the elite. The maintenance of these creations was also a specialized task. Wigs would need to be cleaned, restyled, and repaired. Cleaning might involve carefully combing out any dust or debris and perhaps applying fresh perfumed beeswax or resin to rejuvenate the style and scent. Broken strands would be reattached, loose curls reset. A well-made human hair wig, if properly cared for, could last for many years. In fact, some of the wigs found in tombs are still in remarkably good condition after thousands of years, thanks to the dry Egyptian climate and the protective environment of the tomb. It's like they're ready for a night out, just a little dusty. Some of these preserved wigs even show signs of wear and repair, indicating they were actively used in life before being interred with their owner. Consider the dufresnite, a type of compound wig often seen in the New Kingdom, particularly associated with festivities. These wigs were often very large and elaborate, featuring a multitude of tiny curls or braids, sometimes arranged in distinct layers or sections. They often incorporated floral fillets, beads, and ribbons. These were party wigs, essentially. You wouldn't wear your most solemn ceremonial wig to a banquet where there was music, dancing, and copious amounts of wine. You'd wear your fabulous dufresnite, ready to impress. It's fascinating to think of the specific social codes attached to different wig styles. Just as today, we might choose a different hairstyle for work, a party, or a formal event, the ancient Egyptians had their own nuanced language of hair. Oh, she's wearing her visiting the in-laws wig, very subdued. Last week at the festival, though, it was curls all the way down to her navel. The level of detail extended to the very parting of the hair, or rather, the arrangement of sections in the wig. Some styles had a clear central parting, others were swept to one side, and many, like the tripartite style, had no discernible parting at all, with the hair flowing from the crown in a structured manner. The hairline of the wig was also crucial. It needed to look as natural as possible, or at least intentional. Sometimes, the wearer's own remaining frontal hair, if they weren't completely shaved, might be blended with the front of the wig for a softer, more natural transition, though often the wig had a very defined, stylized edge. The sheer amount of human hair required for the grander New Kingdom wigs is staggering. It has led to speculation about well-organized systems for collecting, trading, and processing hair. Perhaps specific regions were known for providing high-quality hair. It could have been a valuable trade commodity, moving up and down the Nile, and even internationally. We know the Egyptians traded extensively with their neighbors in Nubia, the Levant, and Punt, a land believed to be in the Horn of Africa or southern Arabia. Could bundles of fine black hair have been on the manifest of returning trade expeditions, alongside gold, incense, and exotic animals? It's certainly plausible. The logistics of keeping the elite of an entire kingdom well-wigged for centuries would have been considerable. It wasn't just a cottage industry. For certain periods, it must have been a significant economic activity. You notice the craftsman you've been watching is now working on a child's wig. It's smaller, simpler, perhaps with fewer braids, but made with the same care. Even children, especially those of noble families, wore wigs, sometimes mimicking adult styles on a smaller scale. Or they might wear wigs that incorporated the sidelock of youth, a distinctive hairstyle where the head was shaved except for one long lock of hair on the side, a marker of childhood. For a child who had their head shaved for hygiene, a wig could replicate this important cultural symbol. It's a reminder that these weren't just fashion items, they were deeply embedded in the life cycle and social identity of individuals from a very young age. Imagine a little Egyptian toddler wobbling around in a perfectly coiffed miniature wig. Adorable, and probably a nightmare for the parents to keep on straight. Akhenaten Jr., stop pulling off your ceremonial sidelock wig. The vizier is coming for a playdate. The variety of textures they achieved is also noteworthy. Not all wigs were poker straight or tightly curled. Some had soft waves, others a crimped appearance, and some aimed for a fluffy cloud-like effect with masses of teased hair. This teasing or backcombing technique to create volume is something that has certainly stood the test of time. They might have used fine combs to gently tease the hair towards the base, creating a fuller look before smoothing the outer layer. How they achieved such consistent results without modern styling products is a marvel. Beeswax and plant-based setting lotions clearly packed more of a punch than we give them credit for. They were the original texturizing sprays and mousses. And what about the poor souls who couldn't afford a human hair wig or even a decent plant fiber one? Did they just go bareheaded and itchy? Probably for many, but there might have been very rudimentary coverings, simple cloth wraps or pads of fiber that offered some protection from the sun, even if they didn't have the status or style of a true wig. The desire for adornment and protection is universal, and people would have made do with what they had. But the aspirational aspect of a well-made wig must have been powerful. It was a visible sign that you had a certain level of resources, that you cared about your appearance according to the prevailing cultural norms, and that you were participating fully in the social and religious life of your community. It's like a designer handbag or a fancy car today, a signal, whether consciously intended or not. The process also involved a certain amount of artistry in blending different shades of hair if a completely uniform color wasn't available or desired. Just like a painter mixes colors on a palette, a skilled wig maker could blend slightly different tones of black or brown to create a more natural, subtly variegated look, or to achieve a specific shade requested by a client. This required a good eye for color and a delicate touch in mixing the strands before they were formed into curls or braids and attached to the cap. It was another layer of customization, another mark of a high quality, bespoke creation. Consider the lighting in the workshop. While Egypt is blessed with abundant sunlight for the finest, most intricate work, especially on dark hair, the wig maker would need excellent, consistent illumination. Perhaps they worked in a north-facing portico, which would provide bright, indirect light without the harsh glare of the direct sun. Or they might have used oil lamps for detailed work in the early morning or late afternoon, though the risk of fire with all that hair and beeswax around would have been a constant concern. One stray spark, and your whole inventory could go up in smoke. Well, there goes Queen Ty's order for the festival. Anyone know a good fire sale chant? It adds another layer of appreciation for their skill, working with such flammable materials, with at times open flames or heated tools nearby. Precision and care were paramount, not just for the quality of the wig, but for the safety of the workshop. The scent of the workshop would be complex. Beyond the hair and beeswax, there might be the aroma of various plant gums and resins used as adhesives or setting agents. Acacia gum, myrrh, frankincenses. These substances, often fragrant in their own right, would contribute to the overall olfactory environment and subtly to the finished wigs themselves. Some of these resins also had preservative qualities, which might have unintentionally contributed to the longevity of the wigs found in tombs. It's a happy accident of ancient perfumery and cosmetology. Your hair smells divine, and it's less likely to decompose for a few millennia. Win-win. The meticulous art wasn't just about the big picture. It was about getting every tiny detail perfect. The evenness of the curls, the uniformity of the braid thickness, the secure attachment of each section, the smooth finish of the final surface, all these elements contributed to the overall quality and beauty of the wig. It was a holistic approach where every step, from sourcing the raw materials to the final polishing, was carried out with intention and skill. This dedication to craftsmanship is one of the defining characteristics of ancient Egyptian art and material culture, and their wigs are a prime example of this ethos, worn directly on the body, a personal statement of this cultural value. You don't just slap a wig together if it's meant to represent order, beauty, and your place in the cosmos. You take your sweet, meticulous time. The afternoon sun is beginning to dip lower in the Egyptian sky, painting the horizon in hues of orange and purple. The initial hustle of the day is quieting, and a softer light filters into the wigmaker's workshop. You've seen the raw materials. You've witnessed the painstaking process of construction, the sheer artistry involved in transforming humble strands of hair into majestic coiffures. But the life of an ancient Egyptian wig didn't end when the last curl was set or the final bead attached. These were valuable possessions, intended to last, and their story continues through maintenance, storage, and their profound cultural and religious roles. So you've got your magnificent wig, perhaps a New Kingdom special with 1,000 tiny braids and a sprinkle of gold dust. You don't just toss it on the floor at the end of the day like a sweaty gym sock. Oh no, proper care was essential. These wigs, especially those made of human hair and adorned with precious materials, were significant investments. To maintain their shape and freshness, they were often stored on special wig stands or supports when not being worn. These stands could be made of wood, pottery, or even stone, sometimes carved to roughly resemble a human head or simply a supportive T-shape. You can imagine a row of these stands in a noblewoman's chamber, each displaying a different style, like a silent gallery of hairdressing art. It's the ancient equivalent of those styrofoam heads you see in costume shops, but probably a lot classier. No Made in Thebes sticker on the bottom, though. Cleaning a wig was a delicate operation. You couldn't just dunk it in the Nile and hope for the best. For human hair wigs, cleaning might involve careful combing to remove dust and debris. Perfumed oils or fresh layers of beeswax mixed with fragrant resins could be applied to restore luster, help the style hold, and keep it smelling pleasant. Remember those built-in air fresheners? Regular top-ups were likely required. It's a bit like dry cleaning, but with more incense and less aggressive chemicals. If a wig became heavily soiled or damaged, it would be taken back to the wig maker for professional refurbishment, restyling loose sections, repairing the foundation, or reattaching embellishments. They didn't have a wig conditioner aisle at the local market, so professional help was key for anything major. My lady, your party wig seems to have encountered a rather enthusiastic bowl of fig paste. It will require 3 days of intensive de-sticking. Plant fiber wigs, being less durable, might have had a shorter lifespan or required different cleaning methods, perhaps just brushing and airing out. But even these would be treated with as much care as possible to prolong their usefulness, especially for those with fewer resources. Every possession was valuable. Now let's talk about what these wigs meant, beyond just looking good or keeping lice at bay. Their cultural and religious significance was immense. A mainstream historical fact is that wigs were an integral part of funerary practices. Many elaborate wigs have been found in tombs, carefully placed on or near the mummy, or stored in special boxes. This was to ensure that the deceased would have a perfect, appropriate appearance in the afterlife. Looking your best for Osiris and the other gods of the underworld was paramount. Your earthly status, your adherence to Maat, order and justice, and your readiness for eternity were all reflected in your presentation, and a good wig was part of that divine dress code. The tomb of Tutankhamun, for example, contained several wig boxes, though the wigs themselves had largely decomposed. Other finds, like the remarkably preserved wigs of Ka and Merit, show us just how splendid these funerary preparations could be. It's like packing your best suit for a very, very long journey. The symbolism woven into the wig styles themselves is also profound. The tripartite wig, with its balanced, symmetrical form, echoed the Egyptian love of order and duality. Specific styles might also denote a person's role or status. Priests, for instance, often wore distinctive wigs or headdresses as part of their sacred regalia. The leopard skin garment, often worn by high-ranking priests, was sometimes accompanied by a specific wig style, signifying their ritual purity and authority. Children's wigs incorporating the sidelock of youth clearly marked them as pre-adults. Pharaohs, of course, had a whole wardrobe of crowns and Nemes headcloths, but underlying these, or worn on less formal occasions, would be wigs that also projected power and divinity. The sheer variety seen in art suggests a complex visual language where the choice of wig could communicate a great deal about the wearer's identity, occasion, and social standing. It's like a secret code, but instead of letters, it's curls and braids. Here's a slightly more fringe or unusual detail. Some theories suggest that certain wig styles, particularly those with very tight, numerous curls or braids, might have been intended to mimic the appearance of specific ethnic groups, perhaps Nubians, with whom the Egyptians had a long and complex relationship of trade, cultural exchange, and conflict. The Nubian wig style, short and closely cropped with tight curls, is a well-attested example. While it became a fashionable style adopted by Egyptians themselves, its origins might point to an appreciation for or appropriation of foreign aesthetics. It adds another layer to the idea of wigs as statements of identity, sometimes, perhaps, a borrowed or aspirational identity. For today's diplomatic reception with the Kushite delegation, I think I'll wear my inspired by Nubia look. Very international. The way wigs are depicted in Egyptian art, in tomb paintings, on statues, on reliefs, tells us so much. Art wasn't just decorative, it was functional, often intended to perpetuate life and ensure a successful afterlife. The vibrant colors, the meticulous details, these were meant to be magically effective. When you see a noble couple depicted in a tomb painting, seated before a table laden with offerings, their elegant wigs perfectly coiffed, it's an idealized image meant to last for eternity. The artist took great care to render the texture and style of the wigs, showing individual braids, curls, and adornments. This tells us how important these items were, that they were worthy of such detailed representation. Sometimes, the color of the wigs in paintings is symbolic rather than purely realistic. While most wigs were dark, you might see blue used in certain divine or royal contexts, not because they actually wore bright blue hair wigs, though some ceremonial headdresses were blue, but because blue was a color associated with divinity and the heavens. So the artistic representation could carry multiple layers of meaning. One of the ongoing academic debates concerns the evolution of wig-making techniques and styles over the vast span of ancient Egyptian history, which lasted for millennia. While we can trace broad trends, simpler styles in the Old Kingdom, more elaborate ones in the New Kingdom, and later periods showing influence from Greek and Roman styles, the precise drivers of these changes are still discussed. How much was due to internal fashion trends versus external influences from trade and conquest? How did new tools or materials impact wig design? For example, the introduction of more refined metalworking techniques might have led to finer, more delicate tools for styling. Historians piece together the evidence from surviving wigs, artistic depictions, and textual references to build a picture of this evolution. It's a slow, patient reconstruction, much like the making of a wig itself. They didn't exactly leave behind Vogue Nile edition with seasonal style reports, so scholars have to connect the dots. As Egyptian history progressed into the late period, and then the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, you start to see shifts. While traditional Egyptian styles certainly persisted, especially in religious contexts, Greek and Roman hairstyles began to influence those of the Egyptian elite. You see softer, more naturalistic curled styles, sometimes blending with traditional Egyptian elements. The fusion of cultures was reflected on people's heads. It's a reminder that ancient Egypt wasn't a static, unchanging civilization. It was dynamic, constantly interacting with and adapting to the world around it. Cleopatra VII, the last Ptolemaic ruler, is often depicted with a melon hairstyle characteristic of Hellenistic Greek fashion, though she also appeared in traditional Egyptian regalia, likely including Egyptian-style wigs for ceremonial purposes. Talk about a versatile fashion sense. Greek one day, Egyptian the next, all while running a kingdom. The legacy of ancient Egyptian wig making is subtle but significant. While the direct lineage to modern wig making might be complex and filtered through many other cultures, the Egyptians were certainly among the earliest and most sophisticated wig makers in the ancient world. Their emphasis on human hair, their development of netting foundations, their mastery of setting curls and braids, and their use of wigs for status, adornment, and ritual purposes set a high bar. Later civilizations, including the Greeks and Romans, also used wigs, though perhaps not as ubiquitously or with the same profound religious connotations as in Egypt. The Romans, for instance, famously used blonde wigs made from the hair of Germanic captives. But the sheer artistry and cultural centrality of Egyptian wig making remain unparalleled in the ancient world. Think about the sensory experience of wearing one of the more elaborate Egyptian wigs. It might be quite heavy, especially if adorned with beads or metal ornaments. There would be a sense of pressure on the head from the snug-fitting cap. In the heat, despite some ventilation from a net base, it could still be warm. But there would also be the scent of the perfumes and resins embedded in the hair, a personal cloud of fragrance, and the sound, the gentle rustle of braids, the soft click of beads with movement. It would be a constant awareness of this constructed identity you were wearing. Perhaps it even affected posture. You'd carry yourself differently with such a significant item on your head. No slouching when you're channeling your inner noble or priest. You'd probably walk with a certain gravitas, or at least try not to trip and send your expensive hairdo flying. Whoops, there goes my ankh-shaped hair ornament. 5-second rule. Unlikely. The decline of traditional pharaonic religion and the eventual absorption of Egypt into the Roman Empire, followed by the rise of Christianity and later Islam, led to changes in dress and customs, including the use of wigs. While head coverings remained important for various reasons, the specific styles and cultural meanings of the ancient Egyptian wig tradition gradually faded, becoming relics of a bygone era, preserved in tombs and artistic representations. Yet the human desire for adornment, for expressing identity through hair, whether natural or artificial, is timeless. Every time someone today puts on a wig for fashion, for a theatrical performance, to cover hair loss, or for cultural reasons, there's a faint echo of those ancient Egyptians on the banks of the Nile, meticulously crafting their own elaborate solutions to the eternal human preoccupation with what sits on top of our heads. It makes you reflect on our own relationship with hair and adornment. We still spend incredible amounts of time and money on our hair. We cut it, color it, style it, extend it, and yes, some of us wear wigs or hair pieces. The materials and technologies have changed dramatically. Synthetic fibers, advanced chemical dyes, precision made tools. But the underlying motivations are not so different. We want to look good, to feel confident, to express our personality, to conform to social expectations, or to stand out from the crowd. The ancient Egyptians, with their elaborate wigs, were doing much the same, just with a lot more beeswax and perhaps a more direct line to the gods in their reasoning. You probably don't think your new balayage is going to please Osiris, but you hope it'll look good on Instagram, which is our modern pantheon of sorts. The workshops where these wigs were made, as we imagined earlier, were places of quiet, skilled labor. The rhythmic knotting, the careful braiding, the patient curling, it all speaks to a world where time moved at a different pace, where craftsmanship was valued, and where the creation of beauty was a serious, almost sacred endeavor. These weren't mass-produced items churned out by machines. Each one was a unique piece, touched by human hands, imbued with skill and intention. Even a simpler wig for a working person would have represented a significant amount of labor and resources relative to their income. It's also worth considering the disposal of old or unwanted wigs if they weren't interred with their owners. Were they recycled? Could the hair be salvaged and reused? Given the value of human hair, it's quite possible that wigs that were beyond repair might have been carefully dismantled, the usable hair cleaned and repurposed for new creations, or perhaps for padding or other less visible components. Nothing would go to waste if it could be helped. This idea of recycling and repurposing is something we're increasingly focused on today, but for the ancient Egyptians, it was likely a matter of practicality and necessity. Don't throw out Great Aunt Merritt's old wig. There are still some perfectly good braids in the back we can use for the cat's festival costume. Okay, probably not for the cat, but the principle of conservation would have been strong. The meticulous art of ancient Egyptian wig making, then, offers us a fascinating window into their world, their aesthetic values, their social structures, their religious beliefs, their daily lives, and their incredible ingenuity. From the practical need to deal with sun and pests, to the loftiest expressions of status and piety, the wig played a central role. It was a canvas upon which the ancient Egyptians projected their ideals of beauty, order, and eternity. As you drift off to sleep, perhaps you can imagine the soft whisper of those countless braids, the glint of gold in the torchlight, and the serene, timeless gaze of a people who understood the power of a good hair day, elevated to an art form that has fascinated us for millennia. They remind us that even the most seemingly mundane aspects of daily life can be imbued with profound meaning and extraordinary artistry. Now, as the last rays of the Egyptian sun fade from our mind's eye view and the workshop falls silent, the tools laid neatly aside for another day, we too can prepare for rest. The meticulous care, the patient skill, the quiet dedication of those ancient artisans can serve as a gentle lullaby. Relaxation section. Just let your mind drift now, like a small reed boat on the calm, dark surface of the Nile at twilight. The air around you grows still and quiet, carrying only the faintest, most distant sounds of a world settling down for the night. Feel the tension in your shoulders begin to soften, to melt away like beeswax in the gentle warmth of the sun. Allow your breathing to become slow and deep, each breath drawing in peace, and each exhale releasing any lingering thoughts or worries from the day. Imagine those countless, tiny, perfect braids of an ancient wig, each one a testament to patience and care. Let that image of calm, focused attention soothe your mind. There's no need to strive, no need to achieve anything right now. You are simply here, resting, drifting. The intricate details of the past can fade now, becoming a soft, blurred backdrop to your own journey into sleep. The weight of those elaborate adornments is lifted, replaced by a sense of lightness, of ease. The world of ancient Egypt, with its golden sands and majestic monuments, its skilled artisans and their timeless creations, now recedes into the gentle mists of slumber. All that remains is the quiet rhythm of your own breath, the feeling of comfort in your bed, and the peaceful anticipation of deep, restorative rest. Let any remaining thoughts simply float by, like fallen leaves on a slow-moving stream, disappearing into the peaceful darkness. You are safe, you are comfortable, and you are ready for sleep. Hey everyone, tonight we are casting ourselves adrift, not in a metaphorical sense of confusion, but quite literally, into the vast, seemingly endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Picture yourself not on solid ground, but on a traditional Polynesian voyaging canoe centuries ago. The nearest land is a tiny, unseen speck, hundreds, maybe thousands of miles away. There's no GPS, no satellite phone, no weather app warning you about that distant squall. Just you, a sturdy but relatively small wooden vessel, the endless ocean, and the star-dusted canvas of the night sky. Frankly, armed with only your modern intuition and perhaps a vague memory of how to use a smartphone compass app, which wouldn't work out here anyway, you probably wouldn't survive a week. You'd be hopelessly lost, desperately rationing coconuts, and arguing with a seagull about which way is west. This evening, we're voyaging into the world of ancient Polynesian navigators, the undisputed masters of open ocean exploration, and specifically, we'll be trying to unravel the secrets of their ingenious and intricate stick charts. So before you get too comfortable, before the gentle rocking of our imaginary canoe lulls you completely, go ahead and take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only, of course, if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. We're a community of explorers drifting through history together. Feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to know where our fellow voyagers are joining us from. Now let's turn down the lights, switch on your fan for that gentle, soothing background hum, and together, let's begin tonight's journey across the great ocean. You're standing on the deck of a magnificent double-hulled canoe. The twin hulls, crafted from massive tree trunks, are lashed together with miles of hand-plaited choir rope made from coconut husks. A central platform rests between the hulls, providing space for shelter, supplies, and the all-important crew. A single tall mast supports a triangular sail woven from pandanus leaves, taut and catching the steady trade wind. The only sounds are the creak of the timbers, the rhythmic slap of waves against the hulls, and the whisper of the wind in the sail. The ocean stretches out in every direction, a seemingly infinite canvas of deep blue, flecked with white caps. There's a salty tang in the air, a feeling of immense space, and perhaps just a touch of trepidation if you're not used to being so utterly surrounded by water. It's beautiful, yes, but also humbling. It makes you feel very, very small. The Polynesians were, without a doubt, some of the greatest navigators and explorers in human history. Over a period of several thousand years, they settled a vast triangle of the Pacific Ocean, an area roughly the size of North America. The points of this Polynesian triangle are typically defined as Hawaii in the north, Rapa Nui, Easter Island, in the southeast, and Aotearoa in New Zealand in the southwest. That's millions of square miles of open ocean, dotted with tiny islands, many of them invisible from one another. And they found them, not by accident for the most part, but through deliberate, planned voyages. This is a mainstream historical fact that continues to astound the scale and precision of their systematic exploration and settlement of this enormous oceanic realm. It's like trying to find a handful of specific needles in an unimaginably large haystack, armed with nothing but your wits and what the natural world tells you. No pressure, right? But why did they do it? Why launch out into the unknown, risking everything on these long, arduous voyages? The motivations were likely complex and varied. Perhaps it was population pressure on their home islands, a need for new lands and resources. Maybe it was internal conflicts, with one group choosing to seek their fortunes elsewhere rather than submit or continue fighting. There was also the spirit of exploration itself, the desire to know what lay beyond the horizon. And for a seafaring people, the ocean wasn't necessarily a barrier. It was a highway, a connector. They understood it, respected it, and knew how to read its subtle signs. They weren't just running away from things. They were sailing towards new beginnings, carrying with them their culture, their plants like taro and breadfruit, and their animals, chickens, pigs, and dogs, to establish new communities in untouched lands. Imagine packing up everything essential for starting a new world on a couple of canoes. Your modern moving van struggles with a few boxes of books. They were moving entire ecosystems. The voyaging canoes themselves were masterpieces of Stone Age engineering. These weren't flimsy rafts. The double-hulled design provided stability in rough seas and a good platform for carrying people and supplies. Some could be over 100 feet long, capable of carrying dozens of people, along with enough food, water, plants, and animals for voyages lasting weeks or even months. The hulls were often carved from single, massive tree trunks, hollowed out with adzes made of stone or shell. Planks could be added to raise the sides, meticulously sewn and caulked with natural resins to make them watertight. The rigging, the ropes holding the mast and sail, was incredibly strong, made from fibers like coconut husk, coir, or hibiscus bark, twisted and braided with expert skill. The sail, often a triangular lateen or crab claw shape, was an efficient design for sailing across or even somewhat against the wind. These canoes were fast, maneuverable, and remarkably seaworthy. They were the spaceships of their era, designed for long-duration travel across vast, empty quarters. You wouldn't want your Wi-Fi to drop out on one of these voyages, mostly because Wi-Fi was about 3,000 years in the future, but also because you'd miss the incredible view. Now, how did they find their way? This is where it gets truly fascinating, and where the concept of stick charts eventually comes in, though perhaps not in the way you might first imagine. The Polynesian navigators, often called Palu in some cultures, or Tufunga Terevaka, master canoe voyager, In others, possessed an incredibly deep and nuanced understanding of the natural world. They navigated by the stars, knowing the paths of hundreds of them, recognizing constellations and how their rising and setting points changed with the seasons and latitude. They used the sun as a compass, noting its position at sunrise, noon, and sunset. They understood the prevailing wind patterns, the seasonal shifts, and how winds could be indicators of distant weather systems or even land. They observed the flight paths of migratory birds, knowing that certain birds fly out to sea to feed in the morning and return to land in the evening, providing a potential bearing to an island. Even the clouds could offer clues. Certain types of cloud formations tend to linger over islands or reflect the greenish tint of shallow lagoon waters. It was a holistic system, using every piece of available sensory information. One of the more peculiar or fringe aspects of Polynesian voyaging lore is the existence of ghost islands, or islands of mystery. These were lands that were rumored to exist, perhaps based on ancient legends or fleeting observations like distant cloud banks that mimicked land, or even pumice rafts from underwater volcanic eruptions that might temporarily suggest new Earth. Navigators might set out in search of these elusive isles, sometimes successfully, sometimes returning with tales of empty ocean. Some islands that were once known and settled were later lost, perhaps due to environmental changes, natural disasters, or simply the fading of navigational knowledge for that specific route over generations. These stories highlight the challenges and the occasional uncertainties of even the most skilled voyaging traditions. Imagine setting off for a rumored paradise, only to find nothing but an endless horizon. Well, kids, looks like Uncle Maui's island of eternal coconuts was just a very large, very stationary cloud, back to rationing the breadfruit. The stick charts, most famously known from the Marshall Islands in Micronesia, though the principles of swell analysis were understood across Polynesia, were not maps in the way we think of them today. You wouldn't unroll a stick chart on the deck of the canoe in the middle of a storm and say, according to this, we should turn left at the next big wave. They were primarily mnemonic devices, teaching tools, and ways to represent complex oceanic phenomena, specifically ocean swells. Imagine trying to explain the intricate dance of waves and currents over hundreds of miles to an apprentice navigator. A visual, tactile model would be incredibly useful. These charts were typically made from strips of coconut frond midribs or pandanus roots tied together with coconut fiber string. Small cowrie shells or pieces of coral would be attached to represent islands. The sticks themselves and the way they were angled and curved represented the patterns of ocean swells. The Polynesians understood that open ocean swells, generated by distant storms, travel in predictable directions for vast distances. When these swells encounter an island, they refract, bend around it, and reflect, bounce off it, creating characteristic interference patterns on the leeward side of the island, the side sheltered from the main swell direction. A skilled navigator, far from land, could feel these subtle changes in the motion of the canoe, the way different swell patterns interacted, and interpret them to determine the direction of a nearby island, even when it was well below the horizon. It's like reading Braille, but the bumps are entire ocean swells, and you're reading them with the hull of your canoe and the seat of your pants. So a stick chart wasn't a you are here map. It was more like a schematic diagram, a conceptual model of how swells behave around islands. A Matang chart, for example, was a type of abstract training chart used to teach apprentices the fundamental principles of swell interaction. It might show how one or two sets of swells are affected by a single island represented by a shell. The apprentice would study this, feel the corresponding motions in a real canoe, and gradually learn to recognize these patterns in the open ocean. It wasn't about plotting a course from A to B on the chart itself. It was about internalizing the knowledge the chart represented so you could read the ocean directly. This is very different from our modern reliance on external instruments. We look at a screen. They became the instrument. There's an ongoing academic debate about the precise origins of the Polynesian people and the routes they took to settle the Pacific. One model, often called the express train to Polynesia, suggests a relatively rapid migration out of Southeast Asia, perhaps Taiwan, starting around 3,000 to 3,500 years ago, moving quickly through Melanesia and into Polynesia. Another model, the slow boat or entangled bank hypothesis, suggests a more gradual process with longer periods of interaction and intermingling with existing populations in Melanesia before the push further east into Polynesia. Genetic studies, linguistic analysis, and archaeological evidence all contribute to this complex puzzle, and the picture is still evolving. It's likely a combination of processes, but the speed and daring of their eastward expansion into the remote Pacific remain a remarkable feat, regardless of the exact timetable. They weren't just wandering aimlessly. They had a plan, or at least a very effective strategy for finding new land. Imagine the scene: a master navigator teaching a group of young apprentices. He might be on a beach, using a stick chart laid out on the sand. He points to the shells representing islands, traces the lines of the sticks representing swells. He speaks of the Ronulap, the main deep ocean swell, the Rongrik, the shorter swell from the east, and how they interact. He explains the Kunlap, the refracted swell that bends around an island, and the Anate in Kot, the reflected swell that bounces back from an island's shore. These terms are from the Marshallese language, where stick chart traditions are best documented, but similar concepts existed elsewhere. The apprentices would listen intently, memorizing the patterns, the names, the feelings. Then they would go out in canoes, perhaps in relatively sheltered waters at first, to learn to feel these subtle movements, to connect the abstract diagram with the living reality of the ocean. It's a far cry from learning geography from a textbook or Google Earth. This was embodied knowledge, learned through all the senses. The construction of a voyaging canoe was a major communal undertaking, often imbued with ritual significance. Choosing the right trees, felling them, and shaping the hulls required immense skill and labor, all done with tools of stone, bone, and shell. Each step might be accompanied by chants and offerings, seeking the favor of the gods for the dangerous enterprise of voyaging. The master canoe builder was a highly respected figure, as was the master navigator. Their knowledge was a vital resource for the entire community. When a new canoe was launched, it would be a cause for celebration, a symbol of their connection to the sea and their ability to explore and thrive within it. It wasn't just a vehicle, It was a piece of their identity, a vessel of their hopes and ambitions. Think of the pride they must have felt, seeing this creation, born of their hands and their ancestral knowledge, take to the water, ready to carry them to new horizons. There were probably no champagne bottle launch ceremonies, but maybe a sacred coconut was cracked, or a special chant was offered to Tangaroa, the god of the sea. The knowledge system was incredibly resilient, but also vulnerable. It was passed down orally, from master to apprentice, often within specific families or lineages. This required immense feats of memorization, not just the star paths and swell patterns, but also genealogies of islands, epic poems, and chants that contained navigational clues, weather lore, and the histories of previous voyages. If a master navigator died before fully training a successor, or if a community was devastated by disaster, precious knowledge could be lost. This makes the widespread settlement of Polynesia even more remarkable, that this complex knowledge could be maintained and transmitted across vast distances and many generations. It's like a living library where the books are people and the information is constantly being recited, practiced, and refined. Remember that chant about the place where the red-tailed tropic bird sleeps on the water? That's your marker for finding Puka Puka. The very concept of direction for a Polynesian navigator was more nuanced than our fixed north, south, east, west. They often thought in terms of bearings towards specific islands or towards known star rising or setting points. Their compass was a mental construct, a wind compass that might divide the horizon into 32 or more points, each associated with a specific wind, a star, or a swell direction. It was a dynamic system, constantly being updated based on observation. It required immense mental focus and an uninterrupted connection with the environment. No zoning out and listening to podcasts on these voyages. Your life and the lives of everyone on board depended on your constant vigilance and accurate interpretation of nature's subtle cues. And what about provisions for these long voyages? They carried dried foods, thus like fish and breadfruit, preserved in various ways. They had coconuts for water and food. They managed fresh water supplies carefully, collecting rainwater when possible. And of course, they fished along the way. But it was a precarious existence. A prolonged storm could drive them off course, exhaust their supplies, or damage the canoe. A period of calm could leave them adrift, sails useless. The navigators had to be skilled weather prognosticators as well, able to read the signs of an approaching storm or a shift in the wind. It was high stakes, high skill survival every single day. It makes complaining about a delayed flight seem rather trivial, doesn't it? Oh no, we might be an hour late for our vacation. These ancient Polynesians might be 1,000 miles off course with no food left, but my lukewarm airport coffee is the real tragedy. The world these navigators inhabited was not an empty void, but a rich tapestry of signs and portents. The color of the seawater could indicate proximity to land or certain currents. The presence of specific types of seaweed or driftwood could also be clues. Even the smell of the air, the faint scent of damp earth or vegetation carried on the wind, could signal an island long before it was visible. The navigators were like detectives, constantly gathering and analyzing clues, building a mental map of their position and their path. The stick charts, then, were one tool in a vast arsenal of knowledge, a way to codify and teach one specific but crucial aspect of that knowledge, the language of the waves. As you sit there on the deck of our imaginary canoe, feeling the gentle rise and fall of the swells, you start to appreciate the subtlety of it. One swell might be coming from the east, long and powerful, born of the trade winds. Another, fainter swell might be felt coming from the northwest, perhaps the remnant of a distant storm. And as you, theoretically, approach an island, you might begin to feel a slight confusion in the pattern, a subtle chop or a bending of the main swell as it interacts with the unseen landmass. It's this refined sensory awareness, honed over years of training, that the stick charts help to develop and memorialize. It's a beautiful, intricate system, born of deep intimacy with the ocean. The sun is climbing higher in the vast Pacific sky, glinting off the endless blue. You've begun to grasp the immense skill of these Polynesian voyagers, their deep connection to the natural world. Now let's focus more closely on those fascinating artifacts, the stick charts, particularly as we understand them from the Marshall Islands, where this tradition survived long enough to be documented in detail by outsiders. Though similar principles of wave observation were likely used across Polynesia, the Marshallese stick charts give us the most tangible glimpse into this remarkable system of oceanic cartography. Imagine you're now sitting with a master navigator, perhaps on a quiet, sandy beach shaded by palm trees, the sound of gentle waves a constant backdrop. He's not consulting a laminated nautical chart or a GPS display. Instead, he lays out a delicate, almost abstract-looking construction of sticks and shells. This is his teaching tool, his way of making the invisible forces of the ocean visible, tangible. The materials are simple, sourced directly from the island environment. The sticks are usually the midribs of coconut palm fronds, naturally straight and flexible, or sometimes pieces of pandanus root. They are light, easy to work with, and readily available. These sticks are tied together at various angles using senet, a strong cordage made from coconut husk fibers, the same versatile material used for lashing their canoes. Small cowrie shells, or sometimes pieces of coral or other distinctive shells, are tied onto the framework. Each shell represents an island or a group of atolls. It's a beautiful piece of functional art, deceptively simple in its materials, yet profound in its meaning. There are generally considered to be three main types of Marshallese stick charts, each serving a slightly different purpose. The first type is called a matang chart. This is primarily a training device, an abstract representation used to teach apprentices the fundamental principles of how ocean swells interact with islands and with each other. A matang might not represent any specific, real islands. Instead, it shows idealized scenarios, how a primary swell bends, or refracts, around an island, how it reflects off the shore, or how two different swells might cross and create interference patterns. The apprentice navigator would study these abstract patterns, learning to recognize the characteristic shapes and angles. He would then be taken out in a canoe to feel these actual wave phenomena, to connect the visual representation of the matang with the physical sensations experienced at sea. It's like learning musical scales and arpeggios before you tackle a complex sonata. Okay, class, today's lesson, the confused lumpy water pattern that tells you an island is trying to sneak up on you from the port side. The second type of chart is the meadow chart, sometimes spelled meadow or madu. These are more specific. A meadow chart depicts a particular group of islands or a section of an archipelago. The shells are placed to represent the actual locations of these islands relative to one another, though the scale might not be strictly linear, like a Western map. More importantly, the sticks on a meadow chart show the characteristic swell patterns that are known to occur around and between these specific islands. It would show the navigator, for instance, how the dominant trade wind swell from the east interacts with a particular chain of atolls, and how swells from other directions, perhaps seasonal or generated by distant storms, manifest in that area. These charts are more like regional guides to swell behavior. A navigator specializing in voyages between certain islands would have an intimate mental knowledge of the information encoded in that region's meadow charts. They weren't carrying the chart on the canoe, mind you. The chart was a tool for memorization, for burning these complex patterns into their minds so they could recognize them by feel miles out at sea. Remember page 37 of the Western Atolls Swell Guide? Yeah, that's what this feels like. We should be smelling land soon, or at least seagull droppings. The third type is the rebelib chart, or rebelith. This is the most comprehensive type, often covering a larger portion of the Marshall Islands, sometimes the whole group or significant parts of either the Raleigh, Western, or Ratak, Eastern chains. Again, shells represent islands, and the sticks represent the main swell patterns over this wider area. A rebelib is a master navigator's grand overview, a mental map of his entire operational territory. These charts are incredibly complex, sometimes containing dozens of shells and an intricate latticework of sticks. To an untrained eye, they might look like a random, beautiful jumble. But to the navigator, every curve, every angle, every intersection was rich with information, refined over generations of observation. It's a testament to the human brain's capacity for storing and retrieving complex spatial and sensory data. Your smartphone's memory is impressive, but these guys were storing entire oceans in their heads. So how exactly do these sticks represent ocean phenomena? The core idea is that long, powerful ocean swells, generated by consistent winds or distant storms, travel in relatively straight lines across deep water. When these swells approach an island, their pattern is disturbed. If an island is in the path of a swell, part of the swell will be blocked, creating a shadow zone on the leeward side. The parts of the swell that pass by the edges of the island will bend or refract into this shadow zone. Furthermore, when a swell hits a coastline, it can reflect, sending a weaker counterswell back out to sea. The sticks on the charts represent these lines of swell, the primary uninterrupted ocean swells, and the refracted and reflected swells that are specific to the presence of land. The curvature of the sticks is often crucial. A stick bending around a shell, island, clearly illustrates refraction. The angle at which one stick, representing one swell pattern, intersects another, representing a different swell pattern, can indicate a zone where these swells interfere, creating a characteristic choppy or confused sea state. Navigators learned to recognize these zones. For example, the point where the refracted swell from one side of an island meets the refracted swell from the other side in the lee of the island creates a particular pattern of calm or gentler water, and this meeting point can extend for many miles, forming a kind of pathway leading towards or away from the island. This is a mainstream historical fact. Polynesian navigators could identify the presence and direction of islands that were 50, 60, or even more miles away, well below the visual horizon, simply by interpreting the subtle wave patterns. It's an almost superpower level of sensory perception. The navigator, the Palu, or the expert in reading these signs, underwent incredibly rigorous training, often starting in childhood. This training was largely oral and practical. They would spend countless hours on the water, learning to feel the canoe's motion, to distinguish between different swells. A master navigator might lie down in the hull of the canoe, eyes closed, to better sense the subtle lifts, rolls, and pitches caused by different wave trains passing beneath. It was said they could feel the presence of an island through the soles of their feet or the vibrations in their testicles as the canoe interacted with minute changes in swell patterns. This deep physical connection to the vessel and the ocean was paramount. They weren't just looking at the water, they were listening to it, feeling it, becoming one with its rhythms. Try that on your next ferry ride. Lie down and try to feel for distant islands. You might get some strange looks and possibly seasick, but you'll appreciate the skill involved. This leads us to an interesting, somewhat fringe concept known as ATAC, or a similar term Pukov in the Caroline Islands, where related non-instrument navigation techniques were highly developed. ATAC is a sophisticated mental system for judging distance and maintaining a sense of position on a long voyage. It involves mentally moving a reference island, which is not the destination island and is out of sight, past the canoe. The navigator visualizes a series of reference points, or star bearings, that align with this ATAC island. As the canoe progresses on its journey, the ATAC island is envisioned as passing through these predetermined segments, or bearings. When the ATAC island has moved through all its segments, the navigator knows they have covered a certain distance towards their actual destination. It's a complex form of mental dead reckoning, using an invisible, moving benchmark. It's not directly represented in the stick charts themselves, but it's part of the broader intellectual toolkit of the master navigator. It's like having a virtual co-pilot who only talks in riddles about imaginary islands drifting by. The island of many coconuts has just passed the star of the great turtle's left flipper. We are 1/3 of the way to the place where fish jump with joy. The shells on the stick charts obviously represent islands. Their placement relative to one another is important, but it's not always a precise, two-scale cartographic representation like a modern map. The emphasis is on the swell patterns associated with those islands. A stick chart is less about what is the exact latitude and longitude, and more about what will the ocean feel like as I approach this island from this direction, given these prevailing swells. The spaces between the sticks, the angles of intersection, the curvature, all these are a visual shorthand for complex wave dynamics. It's a language written in sticks and shells, a language that speaks of the ocean's breath. It's crucial to reiterate that these charts were generally not taken on voyages. Imagine trying to consult a delicate framework of sticks in a tossing canoe during a squall. It would quickly become a pile of kindling or get washed overboard. The charts were for study and memorization on land. The navigator internalized the information, creating a detailed mental map. On the voyage, it was this mental map, combined with constant observation of the stars, sun, wind, and especially the swells that guided him. The stick chart was the textbook, the ocean was the examination hall, and the exam was pass-fail with potentially very serious consequences for failure. Did you study the swell chapter? Because I'm feeling a pop quiz coming on, and it involves very large waves and possibly sharks. One of the academic debates surrounding stick charts is the extent of their use and knowledge. Were these charts and the complex navigational understanding they represent common knowledge among all seagoing Marshallese, or was it a specialized skill held by a relatively small guild of elite navigators? The evidence suggests the latter. Becoming a master navigator required decades of intensive training in a particular aptitude. This knowledge was often kept within certain families or clans and passed down from master to apprentice with great secrecy and ritual. Not everyone could become a navigator, just as not everyone today can become a theoretical physicist, even if they have access to the textbooks. Furthermore, while the Marshallese stick charts are the most well-known, scholars debate how similar or different the systems for encoding and teaching swell knowledge might have been in other parts of Polynesia, where such physical charts either weren't made or haven't survived. The underlying principles of reading swells were likely widespread, but the specific forms of representation, like stick charts, may have been more localized. The skill of the navigator was held in extremely high esteem. They were not just pilots, they were scientists and astronomers, priests and leaders. Their ability to guide voyages successfully meant the difference between life and death, prosperity and ruin for their communities. They could find new lands for settlement, establish vital trade routes, and bring back essential resources. A navigator who consistently found his way, who could predict weather, and who knew the secret paths across the ocean was a figure of immense power and respect. They were the keepers of the community's geographic knowledge, their link to the wider world. You didn't argue with your navigator. If he said, "We turn here because the fourth swell from the left feels grumpy," you turned. You probably also made sure he got the best piece of fish at dinner. Imagine the process of learning. An apprentice might spend years just learning the names and locations of islands, the star paths, the wind patterns. Then would come the intensive study of swells, perhaps using Matang charts. He would be quizzed relentlessly by his mentor. If the wrong lap is from the southeast, and you feel a knit in coat on your starboard quarter, where is the nearest land, and what is its name? Failure to answer correctly might result in a sharp rebuke, or perhaps just more hours of study and practice. The pressure to learn and to be accurate was immense. There was no good enough in Polynesian navigation. It had to be precise. The beauty of the stick chart system is its elegance and its direct connection to observable phenomena. It doesn't rely on complex mathematical calculations or delicate instruments that can break. It relies on the human body's ability to sense subtle motions and the human mind's ability to recognize and interpret complex patterns. It's a system perfectly adapted to its environment and the available materials. It's a testament to the incredible intellectual achievements of people who are often, and wrongly, characterized as primitive. There was nothing primitive about this. It was genius. It makes our reliance on a little blue dot on a screen seem almost, well, a bit coddled. My GPS says we're here. The ancient navigator feels we're here because the canoe just did a little wiggle that means land ahoy in 30 miles just past the sleepy whale. The details encoded could be incredibly specific. For example, certain sticks might indicate the range at which a particular swell pattern, indicative of a specific island, could first be detected, or a particular configuration of sticks might show how to navigate through a tricky passage between two closely spaced atolls, using the interacting swell patterns as a guide. Some charts might even implicitly encode information about currents, which also affect swell patterns and the canoe's progress. The navigator had to synthesize all this information, constantly updating his mental position. Consider the challenge of teaching someone to feel the difference between, say, a primary ocean swell and a refracted swell. The primary swell is usually longer, more powerful, with a greater distance between crests. A refracted swell is often shorter, perhaps a bit steeper, and coming from a slightly different angle. Learning to distinguish these, and then to interpret the interference patterns where they meet, is like learning to distinguish the subtle notes and overtones in a complex piece of music. It requires a trained ear, or in this case, a trained everything else. The stick charts provided the musical score, but the navigator had to be the virtuoso performer. The legacy of this knowledge is profound. It allowed the Polynesians to become the most widely dispersed people on Earth before the European age of exploration. They settled an area of ocean that European explorers, with their magnetic compasses, sextants, and chronometers, found challenging for centuries afterward. It highlights that there are many forms of knowledge, many ways of understanding and interacting with the world. The scientific and instrument-based approach of Western navigation is powerful, but so too was the holistic, sensory-based system of the Polynesians. One is not inherently superior to the other. They are different expressions of human ingenuity adapted to different contexts. It's a good reminder that high tech is relative. For their time and place, a stick chart and the knowledge it represented were the absolute cutting edge. The construction of the charts themselves, while using simple materials, was not haphazard. The placement of each stick, the angle of each lashing, the position of each shell, all were deliberate, reflecting accumulated knowledge. A master navigator might spend considerable time creating a chart for teaching or for his own reference, ensuring it accurately represented the complex reality he knew so well. These weren't just functional objects, they were repositories of ancestral wisdom, tangible links to generations of voyagers who had sailed those same waters and read those same swells. Holding one, even a replica, you can almost feel the weight of that accumulated experience, the quiet confidence of those who truly understood the great ocean. You can imagine the navigator running his fingers along the sticks, murmuring the names of the islands and the swells, reinforcing the patterns in his mind before a long and perilous journey. It's a deeply personal connection to the information, something far removed from simply looking up coordinates on a digital map. The stars are beginning to appear in the darkening sky of our imaginary Pacific voyage. The Southern Cross is a familiar beacon, and the Milky Way stretches like a luminous river overhead. You've learned about the incredible voyaging canoes and the intricate stick charts that helped Polynesian navigators understand the language of the ocean swells. But these charts, as crucial as they were for training and memorization, were just one part of a much larger, more complex system of non instrument navigation. The true genius of the Polynesian voyager lay in their ability to synthesize a vast array of environmental information, to read the ocean and the sky like an open book. The foundation of their directional sense, especially on long voyages far from land where swell patterns might be less distinct or more confusing, was the stars. Polynesian navigators had an incredibly detailed mental star compass. They knew the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars and constellations on the horizon. These points provided accurate bearings throughout the night. As one star rose too high to be a useful directional marker or set below the horizon, the navigator would seamlessly switch to another star that was rising or setting on the desired path. It was a dynamic system, constantly adjusting to the celestial clockwork. They didn't just know the major constellations we might recognize. They knew individual stars and smaller star groups, their specific colors, their brightness, and their precise paths across the sky at different times of the year and from different latitudes. It's like having a perfectly calibrated, naturally occurring GPS satellite system, but you have to store all the almanac data and do all the calculations in your head. Okay, Sirius just dipped below the wave tops. Quick, switch to steering by the left nostril of the great sky pig before we end up in Antarctica. During the day, the sun was the primary guide. Navigators would observe its position at sunrise, its arc through the sky, and its setting point. They understood how these points changed with the seasons and with their latitude. Even on cloudy days, they could often sense the sun's position through the light patterns in the clouds. They also paid close attention to the length of the day and the sun's height at noon to get a sense of their latitude, how far north or south they were. It wasn't as precise as a sextant measurement, perhaps, but combined with other observations, it helped them stay on track. Wind patterns were another critical element. Navigators had a deep understanding of prevailing trade winds, seasonal wind shifts, and the winds associated with different weather systems. They could feel subtle changes in wind direction and strength, which might indicate an approaching storm or the presence of a large landmass altering local wind flow. The sails of their canoes were highly adaptable, allowing them to sail effectively with winds from various quarters. They knew which winds were favorable for reaching certain islands and would often wait for the right wind season before embarking on a major voyage. It's like being a master sailor and a meteorologist rolled into one, without any fancy anemometers or weather charts, just the feel of the wind on your skin and the look of the clouds. Speaking of clouds, these too were part of the navigator's toolkit. Certain types of cumulus clouds tend to form over islands, especially volcanic islands with some elevation, as warm, moist air rises up their slopes. From a distance, these stationary cloud caps could indicate land long before the island itself was visible. The underside of clouds could also reflect the color of the water below. A greenish tinge on the bottom of a cloud might suggest the presence of a shallow lagoon and thus an atoll, even if the atoll was still out of sight. It's like nature's own little hints, if you knew how to read them. See that slightly lumpy cloud that hasn't moved for 3 hours and looks a bit like my Auntie Melee's prized taro patch? Land ho, or Auntie Mele is having a very strange day. The flight paths of birds were another vital sign, particularly when navigators believed they were approaching land. Certain seabirds, like the booby or the frigate bird, roost on land at night, but fly out to sea to feed during the day. Observing their purposeful flight direction in the late afternoon could give a strong indication of the bearing to land. The type of bird could also be a clue. Some species rarely venture more than a certain distance from shore, so if you started seeing land roosting birds in increasing numbers, you knew you were getting close. It's like having feathered scouts reporting back to you. And the ocean itself, beyond the swells deciphered with the knowledge gained from stick charts, held more clues. Navigators paid attention to watercolor, which can change with depth or proximity to reefs and lagoons. They observed floating debris, branches, leaves, coconuts, which might indicate a nearby island shedding its vegetation into the sea. Some navigators were even said to be able to detect subtle changes in water temperature or salinity, or even the scent of land, damp earth, fires, specific flowers, carried on the wind from many miles away. Bioluminescence in the water at night could also be a sign. Certain patterns or concentrations of glowing organisms might be associated with specific currents or coastal areas. It was a multi-sensory experience, a total immersion in the environment. One of the most well-established mainstream historical facts about Polynesian voyaging is the capability of their double-hulled canoes. These vessels, like the Hokulea, a modern replica, were not primitive rafts. Archaeological evidence, reconstructions, and successful modern voyages using traditional designs have shown that these canoes were capable of carrying significant cargo, people, plants for cultivation like taro, breadfruit, yams, bananas, and domesticated animals, pigs, dogs, chickens, over thousands of miles of open ocean. This ability to transport a starter kit for a new colony was essential to their successful settlement of such vast and distant island chains. They weren't just exploring, they were intentionally migrating and transplanting their entire way of life. Beyond the physical signs, memorization techniques were crucial for retaining and transmitting this vast corpus of navigational knowledge. This wasn't just about remembering star names or swell patterns. It involved vast amounts of information. Chants and epic poems were a common method. These could encode star paths, directions to islands, descriptions of currents and swell patterns, and even the histories of previous voyages, all within a rhythmic, easily memorizable format. Genealogies were also important. Sometimes, islands were personified or linked in familial relationships, and reciting these genealogies could help navigators remember the locations of islands relative to one another. It's like a massive, orally transmitted database, where the search function is your memory and the operating system is ancient poetry. The chant says, "When the Pleiades kiss the western wave, and the great shark constellation drinks from the southern sky, turn your prow towards the sleeping child of the fire goddess," which means steer west-southwest towards Maui. Now for a more unusual fringe detail regarding the practices of navigators. Many traditions involved strict rituals and taboos that the navigator, and often the entire crew, had to observe before and during a voyage. These could include periods of sexual abstinence, specific dietary restrictions, or the performance of certain rites to propitiate the gods of the sea and sky, like Tangaroa or Kanaloa. The canoe itself might be considered sacred, and certain behaviors on board would be forbidden. These practices served to heighten the spiritual significance of the voyage, to instill discipline and focus in the crew, and to ensure that the navigator remained in a state of ritual purity, believed to be necessary for clear perception and successful communication with the spiritual forces that governed the ocean. Breaking a taboo could be seen as jeopardizing the entire voyage. Imagine the pressure. Don't even think about whistling, or you'll summon a storm, and then we'll all have to answer to Kealoha, the navigator, and he's already grumpy because someone ate his special ritual banana. The cultural and spiritual significance of navigation in Polynesian societies can't be overstated. The ocean was not seen as an alien or hostile environment, but as an ancestral realm, a place of connection and sustenance. Navigators were often seen as having a special spiritual connection, able to mediate between the human world and the world of gods and spirits. Successful voyages reinforced their mana, spiritual power, and authority. The knowledge of how to navigate, how to find new lands, was a sacred trust, a gift from the ancestors and the gods. The canoes themselves were often imbued with their own spirit or personality. This deep spiritual integration of their navigational practices gave them a confidence and resilience that is hard for us to imagine in our more secular, technology-driven world. However, with the arrival of European explorers and missionaries, and the subsequent colonization and modernization of the Pacific Islands, these ancient navigational traditions began to decline. New technologies, like the magnetic compass, sextant, and eventually GPS, offered seemingly easier and more reliable methods of finding one's way. The old knowledge was often dismissed as primitive or superstitious. The master navigators grew old and died, and with them much of their intricate knowledge, passed down orally for generations, began to fade. It was a profound cultural loss, the silencing of a unique intellectual tradition. For a time, it seemed like this incredible art might disappear completely. One of the ongoing academic debates in the study of Polynesian voyaging concerns the maximum proven range of deliberate, non-stop, two-way voyaging using purely traditional methods. While the settlement of extremely remote islands like Rapa Nui, Easter Island, or Aotearoa in New Zealand clearly demonstrates incredible long-distance, one-way capability, the extent to which regular, planned return voyages were made over the longest distances without intermediate landfalls is still discussed. The evidence for return voyages over shorter to medium distances is strong, but for the truly epic journeys to the furthest corners of the Polynesian Triangle, some scholars argue that return voyages might have been rarer or more serendipitous, while others maintain that the system was robust enough for planned two-way travel even over these extreme distances. Pinpointing this with absolute certainty from the archaeological and oral record is challenging. But the story doesn't end with decline. In the latter half of the 20th century, there began a remarkable cultural renaissance across Polynesia, and a key part of this was the revival of traditional voyaging and navigation. A pivotal moment was the construction and voyages of the Hokulea, a performance-accurate replica of a Polynesian voyaging canoe launched in Hawaii in 1975. Under the guidance of Mau Piailug, a master navigator from the Micronesian island of Satawal, where traditional navigation had survived more intact, Hokulea successfully sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti and back using only traditional, non-instrument navigation techniques. This was a powerful demonstration that these ancient methods worked and were not mere myth. It sparked immense pride and interest among Polynesians and inspired similar revival projects in other island nations. This revival has been about more than just preserving old techniques. It's been about reclaiming cultural identity, fostering a deeper connection to ancestral heritage, and promoting sustainable ways of interacting with the ocean. New generations of navigators are being trained, learning the stars, the swells, the winds, and the chants from the few remaining masters and from meticulous research. They are blending ancient knowledge with modern scientific understanding, creating a vibrant, living tradition. It's a powerful testament to the resilience of human culture and the enduring value of ancestral wisdom. It's also a lot harder than just punching coordinates into a machine. Okay, class, if Mao could find Tahiti with nothing but his brain and the ocean, you can definitely find your car keys without calling me. Reflecting on the entire system, the sturdy canoes, the subtle stick charts, the encyclopedic knowledge of stars and natural signs, the deep spiritual framework, one can only feel a profound sense of awe at the intellectual achievement of these ancient Polynesian navigators. They explored and settled a vast portion of our planet using nothing but their senses, their intellect, and their courage, all guided by knowledge accumulated and refined over countless generations. It's a system that demanded total attention, deep respect for the environment, and an unwavering trust in the knowledge passed down. It makes you think about what other incredible human achievements might have been lost to time, or what different paths human knowledge might have taken. The legacy of these navigators lives on, not just in the people of Polynesia today, but in the very spirit of exploration and the human capacity to understand and adapt to the world around us. They showed us that the ocean, which can seem so vast and intimidating, can also be a pathway, a connector, a source of life and discovery. Their voyages were not just physical journeys, but journeys of the mind and spirit, pushing the boundaries of their known world and leaving an indelible mark on human history. As you drift off to sleep, imagine that great canoe sailing silently under a canopy of stars, its navigator alert and watchful, feeling the pulse of the ocean, guided by the wisdom of ages. Relaxation section. Now let your own vessel, your mind, gently ease into the calm harbor of sleep. The vast Pacific sky, once filled with the sharp, guiding points of stars, begins to soften and blur. The rhythmic creaking of the canoe and the whisper of the wind in the pandanus sail fade into a gentle, soothing hum in the background of your awareness. Feel the tension in your neck and shoulders release, as if you finally reached a peaceful, sheltered lagoon after a long journey. Your breath is like the gentle ocean swell now, rising and falling in an easy, natural rhythm. Each inhalation brings a sense of calm, and each exhalation carries away any lingering thoughts like small waves receding from a sandy shore. The intricate patterns of the stick charts, the complex star paths, all the details of that ancient, brilliant navigation can now dissolve. There is no need to steer, no need to watch, no need to interpret. You are simply drifting, safely and comfortably, towards deep, restorative rest. The image of the great ocean fades, replaced by a sense of warmth and stillness. The courage and wisdom of those ancient voyagers become a quiet reassurance, a reminder of the profound peace that can be found in letting go, in trusting the journey. You are safe, you are secure, and the gentle current of sleep is carrying you to a place of profound tranquility. Good night.